Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. And today I'll be talking to you a little bit about the 1974 self-titled debut album by American rock and roll royalty, Kiss. Now, generally speaking, I would say that I am probably a casual to moderate Kiss fan, especially if you're taking their entire catalog into consideration. But if you were really to sort of isolate and just focus on the band's original sort of makeup era, I would say starting with this record, probably going up through like Creatures of the Night, I would say that I'm actually a relatively decent-sized Kiss fan, at least of that era. Now, to me, sort of anything past Creatures of the Night, especially getting into the 80s, now they had a lot of, I would say that they had a lot of really good stuff sort of sprinkled in throughout their entire catalog, even during that era. But I would also have to say that there was a lot of clunkage in those later days, especially in the 80s and into the 90s. In particular, on records like Hot in the Shade and Sonic Boom. I mean, those records are pretty rough. But as far as I was concerned as a kid, I never remember a time in my life where I didn't know who Kiss was, or I hadn't seen a picture of them. To me, I mean, this record came out 2 years before I was even born. So these guys were already part of the pop culture lexicon before I even showed up. And to me, it's kind of like Elvis. I don't remember the first time I ever heard of Elvis or saw a picture of Elvis, heard his music. He was just kind of always up here as far as I'm concerned. And I would say that the same thing goes with these guys. I don't remember the first time I saw a picture of this band or heard this band. I do remember as a kid that my mom did have a couple of Kiss records, at least on cassette. Now, I don't remember her sitting around and listening to Kiss very often, but I do remember that she had copies of both Destroyer and Love Gun on cassette. And I remember even as a little kid, my parents always kind of kept their cassettes in the living room, right near where our stereo was when I was a kid. And I remember even as a kid, I was just always very fascinated by music. And I remember I would sneak out sometimes and I would look at her Kiss album covers. Now, I don't remember her having this one specifically, but I do remember looking at the sleeves of Love Gun and Destroyer, and I was completely fixated by these characters. Now, I couldn't help but be just like so curious as to what this sounded like. Now, as a kid, I never had the gumption or the guts to mess around with my parents' stereo, so I don't think I ever actually put the tapes on myself. But I do remember being completely fixated and interested in what this band must have sounded like. To me, just looking at the picture of the band on the cassettes, you have this like sort of audio idea of what the band sounds like, and to me, these guys had to be the scariest thing in the world. I do remember the first time hearing Kiss and knowing that I was hearing Kiss. It was sort of funny to hear what the music actually sounded like, as opposed to the sort of preconceived idea I had in my head based on the makeup, and especially the sort of scariness of the demon. I remember feeling like, oh, this is pretty benign compared to what I would sort of expect. My personal sort of Kiss fandom, if you will, I believe, began probably around 1999-ish. I remember I had a coworker who I was very good friends with for a while. He and I basically were just musical compadres. We pretty much agreed on everything. He and I were both these sort of punk rock snobby dudes. And he and I used to go over to his house a lot after work. and play records. He was somebody that I loved going to shows with. And I remember one day he and I were at his house spinning records and probably having a couple of wobbly pops. And I remember that he told me, he said, I want to listen to some Kiss. Now, at the time, for some reason, maybe this was my kind of punk rock snobbery. Maybe this was sort of my elitist closed-mindedness. But I remember I told him, I was like, oh, I don't want to listen to Kiss, man. I hate Kiss. And I remember as he was flipping through his bin of records, he stopped dead in his tracks, and he kind of looked over at me, and he gave me a look that I will not soon forget. And he basically looked at me and he said, no, you're not allowed to say that. You're just not allowed to say that. You can't say that. As a music fan, you cannot say you don't like Kiss. He said, so I'm going to put him on, and you're going to listen to him, and you're going to appreciate him. And I remember, I think he put on Destroyer, I'm assuming. And I remember I sat there very stubbornly with my arms crossed and a scowl resting upon my face. And I just had no interest in this. I couldn't possibly have wanted to care less. But much to my chagrin, if you will, I sort of felt my head beginning to bob. And I was like, this is actually not terrible. I think maybe I was guilty at the time a little bit too ignorantly of sort of lumping Kiss in with other bands that I just really don't like at all. Bands that I still to this day don't like. Bands like Aerosmith and Van Halen and stuff like that. I just sort of assumed, I think, ignorantly, that they were just going to be sort of proto versions of those bands. A lot of those bands I just really do not like. You don't even want to get me started on Aerosmith. That's like a whole thing. But it was also around that same time, and probably with that same friend, that I first saw one of the greatest rock and roll movies, really of all time. And that is, of course, Detroit Rock City, which came out, I believe this movie came out in 1999. And to me, I mentioned this on the last video I did on the Ramones, talking about Rock and Roll High School. I mean, I think that this is just one of the greatest rock and roll movies of all time. This thing, I can watch this movie probably literally every day and never get tired of it. This movie makes me wish that I had grown up in the 70s as a Kiss fan. So between actually sitting down and giving the band an actual chance, an opportunity with my friend one night at his house over a six-pack, and seeing this movie, I think right around the time it first came out. I'm pretty sure I saw this movie in the theater. I had definitely began to soften when it came to my ridiculous and sort of ignorant stance on Kiss. And I would say that even to this day, like I said, generally speaking, I would say that I am sort of a casual fan. I would never insult or dare to try to pass myself off as being a diehard or one of the just real passionate, obsessive type of fans. That is actually, I think, where my real sort of kinship with Kiss exists. Like I said, I would consider myself to be sort of a moderate to casual, maybe a little bit more than casual fan, especially when you're talking about the kind of the original Makeup era. But for me, the thing I really connect to most with this band, and the thing I connect to most about this band, is the fan base. I have always had just a huge, enormous soft spot in my heart for Kiss fans. I absolutely admire their passion, their fire, their opinions, and just the level of dedication that they have always shown to this band. Now, as somebody myself who has a relatively obsessive relationship with his favorite artist. I can certainly relate to that element of the Kiss fan base. And for me, I would say that I am not generally really like the biggest podcast person in the world. I kind of go in and out of listening to podcasts. But for me, my all-time favorite podcast is a podcast which is called Three Sides of the Coin, which is, of course, a podcast based on Kiss. Now, the show basically has 3 or 4 hosts, depending on the week. And basically, it's just a group of friends who sit around and dweeb out and just have a total geek fest over their favorite band, which is Kiss. And for me, even though I would say, again, I'm more on the casual side of the Kiss fandom, I just absolutely enjoy and kind of get off on listening to these friends just sort of like dweeb out, tell stories, talk about the latest news. And as somebody who is relatively new to this YouTube sort of platform, and somebody that is working tirelessly, or not tirelessly, but I'm putting in a lot of effort to try to improve the quality of this show, try to make it more watchable, or watchable at all, depending on your point of view. I do spend a lot of time on YouTube sort of watching other shows that are sort of in the same sort of vein, talking about records, talking about music. And I have to say that even on YouTube, a lot of my favorite shows in this sort of genre, or this sort of like vein of record collecting and music dweebery, are a lot of the Kiss shows. Now, I make it a point to try to watch these shows to see what people are doing that I can improve on, things that I like or dislike. I try not to take too much influence away from these shows, and certainly I make an effort not to be plagiaristic. But again, like that show Three Sides of the Coin, which I listen to religiously as a podcast, they actually have a YouTube presence as well. A lot of my favorite music shows on YouTube are the Kiss-related shows. I think there are a lot of really cool shows on YouTube that do Kiss content. I think a lot of those fans are just incredibly entertaining to watch, again, just because of the fire and the passion and just their undying dedication to their favorite band. I will say, as a channel which is Morrissey-centric, and as somebody who has a weekly dedicated Morrissey show, I don't want to use the word jealous, but I do think it's very cool, and I am sort of envious in a way that a lot of these Kiss shows on YouTube have sort of networked out. They sort of shout each other out, they connect with each other, they do crossover episodes, and I really do think that is a really cool thing. I think being a Kiss fan in that sense is cool, with the sense of community. And if you watch some of these shows on YouTube, these sort of crossover, this guy will be on this guy's show, that guy will be on that guy's show, I think that that's really cool. As somebody who is a diehard fan of the big guy, I think it would be really cool if we could sort of create kind of a network of shows like that around Morrissey and the Smiths. Now, I also completely understand, being one of them, that Smiths and Morrissey fans are kind of a different animal, especially compared to most fan bases. In particular, probably Kiss fans. We don't tend to be the most community-minded people in the world. I think a lot of us are lonely and are miserable loners, and that's okay. I embrace that. That's partly kind of how I am. But I do love watching the Kiss content on YouTube. Again, I think that's really where my relationship with Kiss is probably at its strongest, is a connection I feel to their fans because of the obsessiveness. Again, I'm a casual fan, and to be perfectly honest with you, based on my obsession and my dedication to the big guy, and just the level of collectability that he has. Sometimes I feel like there's way too much Morrissey stuff out there in the world to collect. I'm actually very grateful that I am sort of more of a casual Kiss fan because based on their merchandising mechanism and their collectability, if I was a diehard Kiss fan, knowing my personality, knowing my obsessiveness, I would just have no money. And I would actually be totally fine with it. I would be totally fine with it if I had no money. Giving it all to my obsession, which like I said, I feel like sometimes Morrissey is too collectible as it is. I can't even imagine with my obsessiveness being a diehard Kiss fan. But I do want to shout out the diehard foot soldiers in the Kiss Army. Like I said, I'm not going to insult your intelligence and try to pretend like I am among the most dedicated fans of all time. Like I said, of the original makeup era of the band, I would consider myself to be a relatively big fan. But generally speaking, if you were to take a look at the band's entire catalog, I would say I'm certainly more of a casual fan. Now let's get into the record a little bit. This record was recorded at Bell Sound Studio in New York City. According to things I've read and things that have been said by Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, this record was recorded in just about 6 days. It was produced by Kenny Werner and Richie Wise, and it was released on February 18th, 1974. And I really like this record a lot. Now, I don't think that this is necessarily my favorite Kiss record. And it's funny, I don't think I've really ever heard, and I'm probably wrong, I'm sure this is some people's favorite record, but I've never really heard a diehard Kiss fan tell me that this is their favorite record, despite the fact that this thing has a lot of the big-time jams on this thing, and a lot of the songs that the band still play live to this day. Some stuff they've never pulled out of their live set list. I really like this record. I actually really love the production on this record. It's sort of raw, it's gritty, but at the same time it sounds relatively clean. If I had to sort of nitpick one thing I don't like about the production on this record, I think that the drums on this record are just buried a little bit too much. I think it does take away a little bit from the overall feel of the album. I wish the drums were a little bit more out front. I realize, when you're dealing with drum production, it can be a very fine line because you don't want to bury everything else out by the drums, but you also don't want the drums to be too low, and I feel like on this record, the drums are just slightly too low for my taste. Ironically, I have read that Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley said on this record that they wanted a big drum sound, and they definitely did not get it on this record. But I genuinely, or generally speaking, I should say, I really do like the production on this record. I think the production on this record is way better than Hotter Than Hell, to be honest with you. Anyway, this record starts off with the song Strutter. I mean, just an amazing, probably one of my favorite intros to any Kiss song ever. I absolutely love this song. This is iconic. And it's the first song on the first Kiss album, so there's really nothing bad you can say about it. I really do love that song. It's iconic. That one was written, according to the liner notes, it was written by Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons. The second song is Nothing to Lose, written by Gene Simmons. Supposedly, this song is about anal sex. So even as a young lad, before he was benefited by his stardom and his fame and his money, I would say that Gene Simmons was already pretty much a dirtbag. The next song on this album is Firehouse. Again, I really love this song. The song has great guitar work. If you've ever seen this song live, the end of the song, the siren of this song kind of tends to go on forever and ever and ever. And of course, Paul Stanley wears the little sort of toy fire helmet. But I really do like that song a lot too. The next song is Cold Gin, which is written by Ace Frehley, sung by Gene Simmons, a man who claims that he's never been drunk in his life. And I'm not even really here to disagree with that. But I do really like the song Cold Gin. Again, if you've ever seen this song live, Paul Stanley sort of tends to do this very overly dramatic and overly long kind of intro to that song. But I do think it is a really great, iconic song. It's always a song that's always in the set list when you see him live. The next song is Let Me Know. Now, according to Kiss history or Kiss folklore, however you want to describe it, this song used to be called Sunday Driver. It was originally called Sunday Driver. This was the song that when Gene Simmons first met Paul Stanley at a mutual friend's house, Gene Simmons asked Paul Stanley to sing something that he had written. And apparently this was the very first song that Paul Stanley ever wrote or ever sang for Gene Simmons. At the time, it was called Sunday Driver. Now, I want to give credit where credit is due on this. I was watching one of these Kiss shows on YouTube I really like. I believe it is called The Music of Kiss. These two guys who are based out of Tacoma, Washington. And as they were doing their breakdown of the first Kiss album, and of course they're a lot more knowledgeable than I am. They're both, total Kiss freaks. They suggested that when Kiss does their very last show, the very last song of the very last show of their End of the Road tour, that should be the very last song they ever play. And I actually think that that's a really cool idea. They suggested on their channel that if they did that, both Gene and Paul would turn into sobbing messes. I don't disagree with that. Side 2 starts off with the song Kissing Time. This is a cover. Probably my least favorite song on the record. Not that it's really bad. I don't think there's really a lot of stuff on this record that you could accuse of being necessarily bad. I do think it is one of the lesser songs on the record. And especially because this record does have so many sort of classic Kiss cuts. I would say that Kissin' Time is probably my least favorite song on this record, honestly. The next song is Deuce, written by Gene Simmons. That is a classic. I absolutely love the song Deuce. Again, this is another song that when they play live, they absolutely destroy it. I really like the studio version of that song. It is really one of my favorite songs on this record. Now, I tend to be more of a Paul fan than I am a Gene fan. But Deuce is an absolutely killer song. Again, it's a classic. It's a staple that's always been in the live set. The next song is Love Theme from Kiss. This song is okay. This is, again, maybe one of the weaker songs on the record for me. Not overly something that stands out in my opinion. I don't dislike it. I don't think it's bad. But for me, it's just kind of it's a filler. The next song is 100,000 Years. I really love this song. This is actually one of my favorite songs on the record. This song was written by Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons. To me, this is one of the stronger songs on the record. I don't know if you would really say that this one is a deep track. I don't know if there's really any songs on this album that you would really say are deep tracks or not. I think it's good. I think it's actually one of the better songs on the record. The album ends with the song Black Diamond, and that is the goods. I absolutely love the song Black Diamond, written by Paul Stanley. I think that is one of the better songs on this record. And again, it is one of those iconic Kiss tracks that every Kiss fan knows, every Kiss fan loves. And I really do like that album. I think or that song, I should say. I think it's a great way to end the album. But that's a little look back to me. the first 1974 self-titled debut Kiss album. Now, I am very curious to see in October. I will be going to see the End of the Road tour here in Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm a little bit curious to see the show. I'm a little bit curious to see if they alter the set list at all or if they do anything special. Now, obviously, they've been on this tour forever. But I am curious to sort of see the show, see how it goes. I have heard some pretty scathing reviews on Paul Stanley singing. There's been some controversy whether or not he uses backing tracks. I don't really know. Like I said, I'm not really the most diehard fan of all time. To me, as long as I get to go see the show and get to hear the classic tunes, I'm happy. The one thing I will say, and again, I'm a casual fan, so I don't know what this is worth to you. But as the casual Kiss fan that I am, my all-time favorite Kiss member has always been Ace Frehley. For some reason, even as a kid, I was always drawn to the Spaceman. I just loved his makeup. I loved his guitar playing. And now this, of course, is nothing new. This has been going on forever. But I do have to say, one thing that I don't like about the current incarnation of Kiss is I do not like that you have Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer, of course, playing the roles of Ace Frehley and Peter Criss. That's something that's always bothered me. Now, that being said, I'm still going to go to the show in October. And I don't believe for a second that Gene Simmons or Paul Stanley have ever claimed to have the most integrity in the world. I think to them, especially by this point in time, I mean, this is a business. This is all about making as much cake as you possibly can. And as a casual fan, like I said, a fairly casual fan, I realize that my opinion isn't worth a bag of beans. But that being said, I really don't appreciate the idea of doing the Ace Frehley and Peter Criss with Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer. One more thing I wanted to touch on. I really love the album cover of this record. I didn't mention that before. This is probably actually my favorite of the classic era. This is probably my favorite album cover. I mean, of course, who doesn't love Destroyer and Love Gun? But this is probably my favorite of the classic era album covers. And I kind of like the fact, I know that Peter Criss hadn't really perfected his makeup as of the time that this photograph was taken. And of course, I like the Peter Criss classic makeup way better. I actually kind of like the makeup on this one. I love this album cover, so I didn't mention that before. Just superficially, I think it's really cool. Anyway, man, that is a look back at the 1974 self-titled debut Kiss album. I really want to thank you for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records in Nashville, Tennessee. My name is Jamie. Be sure and go out and support your local record store. Listen to American rock and roll royalty in Kiss. Check back on this channel every week for Morrissey Monday, my weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. Feel free to leave a comment in the comment section down below. And check back on this channel every week for more record content. Also, my wife and I, tomorrow, will be heading out to the annual Muddy Roots Festival in Cookeville, Tennessee. This is an annual Labor Day event where bands play. This is a 3-day camping festival. A lot of sort of legacy punk bands play there, as well as a lot of bluegrass and hobo punk. And this weekend I will be seeing the Dead Milkmen, DRI, Cro-Mags, and a few other sort of legacy punk bands. Gwar is going to be there. Not that I'm a big fan. But next week I will come back and I will give you a Muddy Roots recap show. And with any luck, I will be able to get my wife to be my guest on that channel. On that episode, we can give this channel a little bit of sex appeal, at least that way. Anyway, man, thanks again for checking out this video. I really do appreciate it. And I will talk to you next time.